And like I said, one reason the government's plans to give us green electricity instead of coal-fired is that the bush is on fire. I mean, farmers hate having these massive wind farms being built everywhere with giant transmission towers and wires strung up all over their land to hook them all up. And that's why a convoy of farmers today drove from Western Victoria to Melbourne to circle Parliament House with 45 tractors. They are against an interconnector that's being built from New South Wales to Melbourne, right over their land, making it harder to farm, raising the fire danger, looking ugly and more.
And it has to be taken into consideration that we're not vacant land. We have farms, we have businesses, we have livelihoods sitting underneath what are going to be proposed transmission towers and transmission lines, and that needs to be taken into consideration.
In fact, just yesterday, Gina Rinehart, Australia's richest woman and huge owner of farming properties, warned governments to give farmers a break with their global warming schemes.
Most farmers and others in agriculture, be it the orchardists and others, cannot afford net zero. They will have to leave agriculture. With the consequences, Aussies in the towns will see huge food price increases and fresh food shortages.
And like I keep saying, why are we doing all this? The wires, the wind farms, the solar farms, the backup power for when the wind doesn't blow or the sun doesn't shine. If you really do think we need zero emissions electricity, why not just build nuclear power plants where the coal-fired ones are now already? The wire's already there too.
Let's not upset many farmers with bird-killing wind generators and massive solar panel stretches, and bring on clean, safe nuclear energy.
Joining me is Adam Giles, the former Chief Minister of the Northern Territory, now Chief Executive of Gina Rinehart's two key farming businesses, Hancock Agriculture and the legendary S. Kidman & Co. Adam Giles, thank you so much for joining me. Well, now this latest protest outside Parliament House in Melbourne, there seems to be a real anger growing in the bush at some of the global warming policies that are now hitting them. And this is even before the Albanese government has released its new plans for farmers to slash their emissions.
Well, it's interesting to see this protest. It's come out of the blue a little bit. As part of Hancock Agriculture and our partnership with News Corp on the Bush Summit, we've been talking to farmers around regional Australia, most notably last week in Tamworth, Perth yesterday, Port Lincoln today. And one of the things that's coming up, a little bit surprisingly, but faster than expected, is this white-hot anger against wind towers and transmission lines. And it's not just the aesthetical component that people are unhappy with, it's the transmission lines and the wind towers taking away pristine agricultural farming land. It's the environmental impact that it has and all the hazards that it puts into the ground. There's the issues around the recyclable nature and what happens to those wind towers later on. But I think one of the key components is the stealth in which they come onto farming land and to regional communities, compulsory acquiring areas where those transmission lines go and where those wind turbines are physically situated. And that's a white-hot anger, and it's really energising regional Australia and pushing back. And it's not to say that people in regional Australia aren't for a cleaner, greener regional Australia. We all want to be part of that, but net zero with the transmission wires and the wind turbines are a blunt instrument that's coming firmly on the shoulders of particularly farmers in regional Australia, and we're being expected to bear the brunt of net zero on behalf of the government and the 86% of people who live in those capital cities.
Yeah, and I would also like to hear far more discussion of the risk, the fire risk posed by the wind generators and all these wires strung across the country. I don't think we've heard enough about that as well. Now, this, of course, that's just one issue. You've got the government saying that it's going to be developing plans now to get farmers and graziers to reduce their emissions, like emissions from stock and all that kind of thing. In total, how do you think these global warming schemes are going to affect farmers, and what sort of position are they in to absorb the costs and regulations?
Well, I can only talk to it from the perspective of Hancock Agriculture and S. Kidman, and Mrs. Reinhardt yesterday in Perth outlined it quite well when she said, in our company, we're investing $600,000 per homestead in converting them into a solar hybrid diesel backup system. We're purchasing electric motorbikes, we're trialling electric cars, we're putting solar bores on every one of our bores, and we're spending a lot of money. But not every farm in Australia can do that. Not every farmer is backed up by a major mining company with deep pockets. The average farmer in Australia can't afford to put in place the practices of net zero on their own farm. And I heard yesterday in Perth a farmer get up and say that him and his wife and his son on their farm, they feed 5,000 people. But now they're being told, you're not doing enough. You've now got to go and spend $200,000, $300,000, $500,000 to put in net zero practices on your farm. We all want to be part of the solution in supporting this change, but there are elements that are targeting our mass producers of food and fibre and energy in this country that is going to have a detrimental effect and drive people off their properties. And that's why you're seeing protests in places like Melbourne today with the tractors turning up.
I think that's absolutely correct. I've been monitoring this for some time now, and it's just getting, there's more and more opposition in the bush to these things. I mean, they're horrible to look at.
But it's not just that, Andrew. Mate, I was just going to say, it's not just that. Regional Australians deal with many things. We deal with the worst roads in the country, the worst bridges, poor access to infrastructure. We've got continuing reduction in services such as medical, with maternity services and birthing services being taken out of the region and put in capital cities. Education keeps being drawn back by Treasury officials who find it cheaper to deliver those services in the bush. And then you have this uncertainty about net zero coming onto the regions, the environmental damage and impact that wind towers and transmission lines has, the challenges it places on sacred sites. Then you have the cultural heritage in Western Australia, which has been repealed, but every farmer and every regional Australian knows if the voice gets up, this is going to be nationalised and there'll be cultural heritage acts all across Australia. This is uncertainty. So we deal with the everyday challenges of regional lifestyle with lack of infrastructure and services. We deal with exchange rates, interest rates going up, commodity pricing challenges, and then we have the Voice, Cultural Heritage Act, net zero. Mate, it is just getting too much and people have had enough.
Well, you mentioned the Voice, Adam. Adam Giles, you're the first state or territory leader we ever had with Indigenous background as well. Where are you on the Voice personally?
Well, mate, I'll just make it very clear that I'm an Australian. I'm not an Aboriginal MP. I'm an Australian person who happened to find himself to be the 10th Chief Minister in Australia. In regards to the Voice, I'm not a campaigner. I've been approached many times by the Yes campaign to get on board, both pre the Uluru Forum and then post. My position is that I believe that we should be supporting Aboriginal people all across Australia have their voice at the local level, not just 20 or so people in Canberra. All my working life and my personal life, knowing, appreciating, respecting Aboriginal people across the country, I think we need more voices on the ground as part of our democracy in a normal sense. So they have one voice, one vote, just like every other Australian. I think another bureaucracy in Canberra is just complete madness.
Is it just the fact that there are so many Aboriginal bureaucracies already, and I think the challenge really is to get them working properly and also find out where all the money has gone, because some things aren't working, and of course get more assimilationist policies rather than, separatist policies. But the Voice itself, are you also objecting to the fact that it does divide us by race? You've been clear from the start, you never wanted to be tagged as the Aboriginal politician. You wanted to be seen as Adam Giles. Is it the racial differences here that offend you?
Well, no, it's the more philosophical and factual approach. I believe that we should be not running a socialist regime or a socialist program for Aboriginal people in Australia, and that's what we've done for decades. You go 50, 60 years, particularly in regional remote Australia, we have this protectionist regime on Aboriginal people and run a socialist vent. And people in Canberra don't want to move to a capitalist environment where we have economies being built, businesses being created, people getting into jobs and having better education standards. And I think that that's what we should do. And if you look across this great landscape of Australia now, whether you're in Broome, whether you're in Fitzroy Crossing, Kununurra, Tennant Creek, Darwin, Alice Springs, Townsville, Mount Isa, and I've just named those northern parts of the country. You can also look southern. There is a national Indigenous youth crime crisis in this country. This is a direct result of decades of socialism, and what we need to be doing in Aboriginal affairs is eradicating socialism and putting in place capitalism, creating economies, businesses and jobs, combining that with mutual obligation and getting people active in our economy. And you will see great success stories from regional remote Aboriginal people, just like you do in urban Australia with successful Aboriginal people. And I think that that will start to drive change. To just talk about the voice and have a representative body, it's a government department. I used to work with ATSIC. I've been involved in the ATSIC review. I've gone around Australia. I've consulted with Aboriginal people. People want jobs and a hope and a future. And I think that's what we should be focusing on, not a government department. There's a myriad of them.
Just finally, just to clear up, when people say, you say the socialist system, I don't think many Australians, in these cities realise what we're really talking about, which includes, in fact, that so many Aboriginal communities where they've got native title, the land is held socialist-wise, communist-wise, and I mean that almost literally, that no person can have individual title, no person can then improve their block of land and make a go of it. It is held by the whole community. And where does that kind of system, where has it ever worked?
Andrew, every society in the world has progressed by having individual land tenure. Without individual land tenure, you can't do that. But that's not just one component that we're talking about here in regards to socialism. But you can draw a direct correlation between some of the results that come out of countries such as Venezuela, Sri Lanka. When these countries move to a socialist system, there's decay in the community, people live in poverty, and there's challenges. And until you bring back that economic paradigm, things won't change, and that's what we need to change. And if you look at that community title right now, you look at native title. The prescribed body's corporate for every native title body in Australia. Rather than spend all this money on The Voice and have all these corporations donating money to a government campaign, it would be far better to divide that money up and give it to every prescribed body corporate and getting them involved in economics and supporting business development, job creation. And then you would start to see fundamental change in these communities, particularly in regional remote Australia. And I think that's what's really important. And that's why my economic mindset and the consultation and relationships I have and continue to have with Aboriginal people around Australia forms my opinion on why The Voice isn't right. The Voice is a centralised bureaucracy based in Canberra that I think will see a lot of elite people in it. It won't drive change. What it will further do is further put in place a protectionist racket and regime to oversee communist and socialist-based policies and agendas in regional and remote Australia, and that's going to hold Aboriginal people back to the detriment of themselves, their families and their communities.
Adam Giles, always great to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Good on you, Andrew. Thanks, mate.